Welcome, babes, to Practice Live. This is a monthly podcast that happens on the third Friday of every month, where we get in deep with people from all walks, from all the world, talking about what it means to really be here. Today's guest is Theodore. I can't even name how long we've known each other. Instantly felt like lifetimes, and we've had lifetimes within our friendship. And it's just such an honor and a pleasure to be here with her today. We're going to talk about something that came up in one of our conversations, this phrase happenstantial magic, which we'll unpack a little bit, and the archetype of the fool, and Olive's incredible work with boats and her big vision with approaching houselessness and waste. And we're going to go in all kinds of directions. So without we're going to go in all kinds of directions. Without further ado, I'd love to hand over the mic to Olive. And if you could let us know what's important to know about you, which can be anything that you feel called to say.
Okay, well, first of all, hello, and thank you, whoever's watching this and whoever's here. It's best that I don't know. I'm going to breathe with everybody for a minute because I got to do that. I am still Olive, sometimes Teddy. Happy to be either and both. I, just for quick background, and since this is so present in today's conversation and my general everyday world, started a boat recycling company, a nonprofit called Walrus. And that's focused on housing solutions, supporting local artists, and ocean conservation work. I have been studying relationship to other and self and earth and community for probably this lifetime, but really since having moved to Bellingham about 10 something years ago, studying yoga and walking through many of Meg's offerings, the small regular practices and the longer arcs, really just leaning into how to be here. Surprise. In a way that's generative to self and healing to self, and generative to other and planet, and healing to other and planet. And I love to be wild and creative and deep and of the heart. And I don't know that I always hit those marks, but that's where I'm always trying to go. So that is what feels present about who I am today.
Ooh, rad. A student of relationships, and a student of being here in ways that are generative to self, to other, to planet. I really love this as like a bio. Usually people are like, I do this for work. And you're all like, I'm a student of relationships. That feels so beautiful and very accurate to you and what I know about you.
Thanks, Meg.
Also, just this beautiful surrounding that you're in. Look at this boat that Teddy's in.
The big wheel.
The big wheel. The boat that is so big for Seattle's lakes.
Yeah. I will say, because it's just too cool not to share, that this boat that I am in is 10 years older than the Titanic.
Whoa. So. Wow. How did you come in contact with this boat? Well, actually, let me ask this question. Let me back this question up a little bit. How did you get into boats? What was because you're from the Midwest. It's not like you you're around a lot of boats.
So yeah, I love this question. Juicy. I do know now that I'm so deeply in the maritime world, that there is quite a boating scene in Chicago, where I'm from, but I did not know that growing up. And this other nonprofit organization that I work for, the Center for Wooden Boats, which focuses on like youth access to water. Oh my gosh, should be everywhere. I wish I had something like that growing up. And I didn't. Growing up, boats felt very much like I had friends who were wealthy who had lake houses. And maybe once a year, I would end up at a wealthy friend's lake house. And I would be like, when are we going on the boat? When are we going on the boat? And that probably stems from whatever part of me is deeply mermaid and trying to grow gills and wanting to be a fish. So there's this draw biologically to be with the water, one with the water, and then this draw from a very early age to study marine biology. I had this like weird little pretend laptop where you slide the cards in and like enter the code for the card, and it'd be like, which whale is this whale? Which dolphin is that dolphin? I was really into all that and wanted to be a marine biologist from a pretty early age. And I would say that was like around 7. And when I was 12, I lost my dad, and that got things like just got worse. They just got like way worse for a way long time. And access to any of those things got less and less, resource got less and less, love got less and less. And where I like what really ended up pulling me out of that was this call towards community, towards relationship, towards earth, and towards art. And when I left Chicago, I had this idea that I thought was new. It ended up being something that I have also written down from the age of 7. This community art space that's like free to nurture dreams for all people and to have community sort of rally up around it once it's spoken. So I left Chicago with that vision, heading for the ocean. Not exactly sure where, but this is where the happenstantial magic, right? I didn't plan anything. I didn't really take much. I didn't know what was going to happen. I just knew that I was following something true to myself, and really focused on listening to whatever that was moment to moment, which for the sake of conversation on practice is probably my deepest practice is presence, and listening. And wow, is there just ever so much more to learn about those things. So back to boats. When I left, this is so beautiful to me. I wish I should have brought the one piece, but maybe I'll send Meg a couple key photos to share with us or something after. My mother's baby mobile was made out of seashells that had been crushed back into glass. And it's really just dainty and charming. And before I left Chicago, I took 2 ornaments from this baby mobile of seashell glass. One was a star and one was a sailboat. And that's something like I carried around with me. I wasn't really thinking about what that meant, that I took those 2 things or anything. It just was this honestly somewhat quiet, perseverant, but quiet call towards boats. And I went ahead and ended up opening this art center. It took many years to bring that to fruit, but I really poured myself into that and into the community and finding the pieces to braid together to make that real. Looking at Meg's braids as I say that. Beautiful. So I was dealing with some subtle health issues throughout all of the sort of things are getting worse and worse time. And in the midst of having this art center, I got much sicker, and everything that I had worked to build up from nothing being, I had a lot, and I also had very little in the ways that most people often have a lot or even some. I lost my home. I lost the art center, which was something that I lost my home the first time when I was 14. So it was really heartbreaking to have built up so much, like have tended my heart so closely to try to be good and giving and loving to the world and really focus on that, only to have that all sort of like this large wave come and just, pull everything from the sands back into the sea. And I'll say that things like sort of went even a little lower from there. I was like, oh, I didn't know we could go lower, but we are going lower, deeper, but through a lens of pain. And in that place, I was really struggling with my physical state, and I'm still struggling with that. I just spent the last 3 days, I've actually been quite sick. So I'm still moving through that and carrying all this together. And what's super fucking cool about that, are we saying fucking on here? Because I just said it twice. uh, what's super cool about that is that the boats, like that, my connection to the water, my connection to my purpose is like healing me every day, or at least giving me cause to be here every day, which like subdues sometimes the pain, or is this like carrot before my pony self. Like, just keep trotting, or swimming. You know, we got water, we got horses, we're wild things here. So back into all of that, it's a pretty distinct memory of being like just curled up in a ball, rather hopeless, on the floor of my apartment, like in pain. And you know, that's really quite a compound place when you're struggling with like moving through some deep traumas, and your mental state and your physical body is unraveling at the same time. It's really hard for that not to feed one to feed off of each other. Anyways, I found at like 3 o'clock in the morning, couldn't sleep, found a beautiful boat with a rainbow sail, this baby blue boat with a rainbow sail. Everything inside is just like hand carved to this most exquisite, it was a different man's life work, which is actually true about so many of these boats. People spend their whole lives making these masterpieces that bring us close to the water, where like we're sleeping inside a tree, inside the water, in these wooden boats. It's extraordinary. So I found that boat on Craigslist. I wrote to them and I was like, I've never even been sailing. I have to try. Like, I feel so called towards this, you know, trying to be honest, but also trying to advocate for this dream. And something I've come to realize retrospectively is that I put all this energy towards everyone else's dreams. And I think something for those of us who grow up in difficult home lives, especially where there's trauma, like a sense of self is kind of hard to come by. And I feel like that often goes one way or the other, where people are like overly focused on how everyone else is feeling, thinking, doing, being, or people like go really protective and they're really like, it's me and that's it. And I was definitely, to the best of my abilities, honestly, like trying to be focused about everyone else and how everyone was doing. So to have suddenly a dream that was my dream, that was like as if I'd walked into my own art center and said, what I really want is to learn how to sail. You know, I poured that into this email to these folks, and they wrote back immediately. They said, you're second in line. We've taken the ad down. There are so many people who want this beautiful boat. And we went through a series of phone conversations about like what some next steps could look like, knowing still that I'm second in line, not first. And there's so much to every, like, all of this feels like this wild constellation that was woven in the sky that I love, like pulling back through my hands and revisiting. But for time's sake, we'll just fast forward a year. I'm out in a canoe with a friend who still lives in Bellingham. Hello, if you're listening to this. And we just finished our canoe trip, and he said, whatever happened to that blue boat? And I said, oh, I think it went somewhere different, but I knew from the beginning that like it had its own strong, powerful course. And the very next day, a year later, I got a call from the people that said the boat's yours. At which point I moved to, fast forwarding a bunch of steps again, but I moved to Port Townsend, which is kind of the boat building capital of Washington, and one of the boat building capitals of the big land that we live on. So from there, I had been working with this practitioner who was, really helping me get my physical body better already. And so we've got the boats there already, and we've got this physical magic sort of support there already. So I moved in. I moved into Port Townsend, like all in for this boat. to learn everything I could about it. I started working in the boatyard. So I'd work all day in the boatyard, and then I'd go visit this woman and like eat whatever things she said, touch whatever parts of my body, like just do that every day, sort of pairing this together. And while I mean, I guess to rewind a step, something immediate about getting this boat was like, I'd lost a home that I owned in getting sick. And owning this boat, all of a sudden I had that sense of sovereignty that, again, had been something I struggled with since a very early age. Even before my dad had died, I moved 18 times before I was 18. So there's a lot in there, even before this sort of like big ruptures. These big ruptures started happening. And immediately with this boat came sovereignty and safety of like, I have my own island. I have my own home. There is something for me to go to, something I can control. And I don't mean that in a controlling way. I mean that in like a, what temperature is it? Who's here or not here? Are we sleeping or awake? That kind of way. So living in the boatyard, I started I started working with like in larger and larger scale of projects with folks. I just was totally enthralled by the systems and connection, and this like, there's this huge wave of tiny houses over the last like 5-10 years or so, but like boats are the original, like these are brilliantly designed tiny footprints, like really largely made to be in tune with nature. And the sort of lapses in that are a lot of what I'm focusing on environmentally in Walrus. Like, how do we have all this and make it totally congruent, totally kind towards the nature that it's meant to be in relationship with. So living in the boatyard, I started to realize that there were a lot of beautiful boats that people did not want. There's all these free boats that people are just desperate to get rid of. And the unfortunate, crazy thing is that it's really fucking expensive to get rid of a boat, like averaging $50,000 to get rid of a boat, which is not accessible. And then I started to find out all these other things that are not accessible, where it's like, well, you have to have insurance to be able to haul your boat out. And if you can't get insurance, you can't haul your boat out. And if you can't haul your boat out, you can't keep a healthy boat. And if you can't keep a healthy boat, your boat's going to start disintegrating. It's just going to make it an environmental hazard. And if your boat's an environmental hazard, you might get, start getting fined, this, that, and the other thing from the DNR. Not to mention that most of us, I hope, don't want to have a negative environmental impact. I'm getting really far into all this, so I'm going to stop for a second and be like, how are we doing?
This is so good. This is so good. Keep going. Also, when Olive was being touched by a woman in that whole thing, that was a medical professional. Consented.
Yes, it was, they were largely my feet. She was largely touching my feet for whoever wants to know. And drinking lots of green things. I was drinking lots of roots and greens, lots of dandelion. Yeah, I mean, actually, that's like a pretty good pause point as far as that arc of how did I get into boats. That's really brings us pretty far there. And now I just will get on any boat I possibly can. This boat, Irene, which is an 80-foot tugboat that is 10 years older than the Titanic, built 1902. She's my home with myself and my partner. We live on Irene. And then I have another sailboat that's next to me that was built in the 70s. It's like just this incredible. There are only 7 of them ever made, built on the East Coast. That's a wooden boat as well. And both of those boats came through Walrus. So these are, and again, I'll share some photos later, so there'll be more context of what that looks like. But pretty spectacular that this 80 feet. I mean, we have a guest room, we have a laundry room, we have all these things. So you imagine this sort of boat is the sort of boat that's costing maybe $100,000 to destroy, and that has all these amenities that we see it and we say, I'm gonna switch into waste now. Are we ready for that? That's why I feel coming. Okay.
I was going to ask you to maybe share a little bit about your big vision. Like, what's your big vision?
Yeah. So looking at that, you know, this is a house. This is a large house. This is a kind of a nice house. We're pretty well suited here. I can see, like, I have a really great view of Seattle here in the wheelhouse and in our bedroom. So all that, I just was thinking about people destroying that and thinking about how these boats are made to withstand incredible weather conditions, from the pressure of the water itself to the waves crashing over to the just weathering general storms and sun and wind. And to think that, so we get one puncture or we break the engine, like one thing goes wrong and we decide the whole thing isn't good anymore, which I imagine, as I can say, we feel that in so many ways as people, that happens, and to stuff, especially stuff, where there's this huge disease of waste, of throwing things away, of deciding that something's not worth anything anymore, which we don't see in nature. Nature does not have anything that is not more purpose and does not carry more purpose. And I think something really important to that, oh no, if I have my train of thought, stay with me. Choo choo. Well, let's make a new train. We decide that things aren't worth something anymore, but in nature it's all cyclical. And oh my gosh, I'm like it's actually a key thought. I gotta find it, but it's toying with me. Okay, there's a lot of like organic material versus other material, and that's a valid distinction. That's there for a reason. It's scientific, it's accurate. And everything is of the earth. Everything is still of nature. Whether it's going through certain processes where it's transforming, sure, but it's still of the earth. So the mindset that some things are garbage, trash, can't be used again, can't become something again, is just really, in my opinion, severely lacking some creativity and reality. And attunement to the natural world that we cannot escape, are intrinsically part of. And so I've been a part of some other projects before. The first nonprofit that I ever got going with before I even left Chicago, we built this school out of trash. We started this bottle brick business. And that was in a different country where there's a difference for how materials can be used and how things can be sold. There's a lot more regulation here, and there's plenty of conversations to have about that, but I'm not going to get into any of that right now. The point is, I'm really interested in finding alternative ways to use things, and I honestly think we could shut down manufacturing for a while and be fine, and like what we would come up with would be incredible. I'm not in a position to do that, but I'm working my way into those rooms to say, what if we just stopped making things that are new? What if we had to use everything we had for like 5 years and just saw what happened? So when I started this, I wasn't really thinking big picture. I was thinking like, I want a house. I want to dream. I want to feel alive. If I'm going to be sick, if I'm going to, suffer in this way, I want to feel one more time. I want to feel alive one more time. Like, that's really where it started. And then seeing all that's going on there, I thought, well, there's really a problem here, like with many intersections and many opportunities for impact. One of those things being like artists, having run this art center and seeing how many needs there are and what variety that is. Materials are a huge thing, and many of these boats are made out of extraordinary materials, some that are not even legal to procure anymore, that are going in the dumpster. Like, I don't know if I was clear about that's what there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of boats per state that are just getting smushed and dumpstered, that are made of incredible materials, full of kitchens and electrical and all those things, that are just getting wrecked, and nothing more. So my first part of this was like, well, let's make houses, let's make building materials out of the boats. Like, fiberglass can be used to fortify cement. Fiberglass can now be used to make rebar that's just as strong as metal rebar. There's all these applications. And then there's just the basic, like, this boat is my home. There's the opportunity to take the top of a boat and put it on some land, on a foundation. It's already a tiny house, just funky shaped, built to withstand really tough weather conditions. Definitely not a bad thing. And then with boats like that, like this boat, being an example with a wooden hull, there's a bacteria and a mushroom that can work together to strip all the toxins. That wooden hull can go and be sunk intentionally, stripped of all the toxins and then sunk. We've already seen it happen, even when they're not stripped of their toxins, that the earth just reclaims that, the ocean reclaims that, and a reef will enter where that wood sort of vessel is holding that shape. So I'm really excited to intentionally go about that. And actually, there's a project that just started going on in Europe where they're doing that with buses, based on what they've seen with boats. But we're not actually doing that with boats on purpose. It's like, oh, we sunk it, we'll call it a reef. So there's so many opportunities here. And what this has really grown into for me is like, I want to transform the way we think about waste on that interpersonal level, like as someone who's related to themselves as being trash. Like I have felt that on such a deep level and moving through what I've been through in my life. And then outside of myself too, just seeing like there is value and beauty in everything. And we have to see that. We have to believe that. We have to celebrate that. We have to advocate for that. Or at least to have the world that I know is possible, which is, language that I'm referencing, something that has really been offered to presence to in all the work I've done with Meg over the years of like, what is the world that you know is possible? And I'm so grateful to be dreaming alongside her in constantly moving towards that bigger, softer, brighter, more giving, more loving world.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I'm kind of going back a little bit to what you said a little while ago of like, this started because I wanted to feel alive at least one more time. And then when I got into it, I saw some things. I saw the problems. And I'm, of course, wrapping this into happenstantial magic because I feel like one of the things about happenstantial magic, right, is, and you said this in the beginning, which is like, I didn't take much with me. I didn't plan much. I listened and I stayed present. And something I know is that I heard somebody say once that having a savings account is colonial. And I was like, confronting. As somebody who's had a lot of my story is actually very similar to Teddy's. Like we have connected over like being scrappy and making a lot of beauty out of scrap metal, scrap life. So like so having a savings account and to some degree has been decolonial for me as a mixed indigenous Latina person. But part of what I know about this is that true human, I guess I'm going to like make a strong statement. True human that trusts life doesn't need to prepare everything or like have the plan or take much with them. Like but we're also in a context that has been stripped of that. And so when some of us are operating in that and then being met by the system that's very fractured and very power over, very hungry ghost about everything, it can be really harrowing to have kept that innocence intact, to have kept that trust intact, and to still avail yourself to life. So I guess I'm highlighting this like huge lifelong thread of happenstantial magic of like, I started in Chicago. I made my way to Bellingham. I didn't bring much with me and I didn't have a plan. I just kept listening. And then I found myself listening and I found myself in this world of boats. And here I am in this, like at this cusp, at this edge of like incredible, purposeful direction through navigating what I would call the energy of recognition. Like it could have been anything, but it was always this. Like it could have been anything except like you keep seeing the thing and then going there and actually trusting yourself enough to go there. So I guess I'm celebrating you. Actually, I don't guess that. I know that I am because I have always celebrated you, and particularly with this quality of deep listening and present step taking. and to see the problem and to meet it so creatively. You just said something so powerful about that, of like, this mindset of garbage is severely lacking creativity. It is. It's severely lacking creativity, and I feel like one of the most important things that human can reinstate is the technology of imagination, the ability to see something new, the ability to see something new with what's here and to continue to navigate that really, keenly, really presently, and your story just illustrated that. Um, Also, I'm just highlighting this, like, heartbreaking but fucking awesome line you just said of, "I wanna think about how we think about waste as someone who has thought of themselves as trash." Like, I think a lot of us in the current Western context, I th personally, I see that one of the 2 of the biggest diseases of the current Western context are a lack of knowing belonging, which I feel like is incredibly reliant on being connected and belonging to the more than human world. I don't think we can look to other humans and remember belonging because most other humans have forgotten belonging. And the other disease is worth. The other disease is this question of our worth. And um, it's been fragmented and moved into what we do and what we make, like what we make from what we do based on the resource of our bodies, rather than the resources, more interior, inner world resources. And I feel like so much of what you and I have been building for about a decade is like awareness of the inner life resources of creativity, of imagination, of staying present. There's something really here too about the happenstantial magic of illness. I think part of when I think these words happenstantial magic maybe like point to like, I just stepped out and everything worked out and it was so beautiful and easy. Happenstantial magic. Is it Maybelline or is it me? um like happenstantial magic can come through dads dying young. You and I both have that. It can come through illness. Like I've actually witnessed this so much in my practice where like the elegance of the orchestration, and it's not about bypassing the pain, the discomfort, the reality of illness. It's also seeing, in addition, an additional facet of reality through how illness shows up. And I guess one final thing I'll say about this is I had a session with somebody recently in my practice, and they said that somebody had reminded them about Saint Illness, which says stillness. And I was like, "Ooh, illness." But I'm curious if this isn't part of our plan, but I'm curious if you have any words in response to any of that really, but in response to navigating the world with chronic condition, navigating the world with chronic condition in these ways, in this way of presence, in this way of creativity, in this way of like reinstating worth beyond productivity or beyond, the quantifier of money. No big deal. Floor is yours. Solve all of your problems, Teddy. Solve all of them. Okay, cool. Go.
Okay. So I think yeah, there's some serious grit to happenstantial magic, especially because, as you said so well, Meg, like our society, our interpersonal infrastructure and cultural infrastructure largely does not support that. It tells you that you should be afraid. It tells you that you better like have everything you need 3 times over. It tells you that you better have more than your neighbor. It tells you that you can't trust your neighbor. It tells you that all you need is yourself, so on and so forth. So I think happenstantial magic, like I when I went to do my yoga teacher training, I went to India and I didn't make any plans. I wanted to have that container of time to feel, to listen, to trust. Being in New Delhi was terrifying. It was so busy. I would not ever do that to myself again. And like I got there, I sat on the floor. Like I've walked, and I've done this regularly where I just walk as far as I can and I sit down somewhere until I feel something new and then I do it again. And there are lots of things that happened in there that like weren't the most elegant, weren't the most graceful. I wasn't the most set up for. And it's easy to be critical on myself actually looking back at some of those things of like, well, if I would have had this, that, or the other thing in place, or if I would have thought more about it ahead of time. But what I really want to tie in with that is like, I haven't always had the resources. I didn't have the resources to plan a trip to India. Like I was able to get the resources together to go to India. And so like often I've had to make the choice of like, am I going to trust or am I going to plan and wait? Go now and trust or plan and wait. And for me, like, I didn't think I was going to live till I was 18. And then, dealing with all this illness on top of that, that's only been another like challenge. So it's always been largely for me, like, go. I almost always choose to go and do the thing that's showing itself to me. And as something like that I would invite other people, I think, to practice, that's one of those things is like when you get that, like, you don't have to have everything in place. And now a funny piece with that is that growing up as in as much difficulty as I did, in some ways I'm primed for like sleeping on cardboard outside of a church, which happened one night while I was traveling somewhere without plans. Not everyone is like ready for that sort of, to be out in that sort of way. But there are also, it doesn't have to be so drastic, which has been something else that I've, slowly come into. How can that be more graceful? How can that be more, like, how can I still give myself away to the vision and be taking care of myself within that? Like there's so many sort of levers to pull and attunements to make within how all that looks. But a big piece as far as the money comes is I've never really looked at like, well, how much does that cost? I've always just looked at what does it take to get there? Like, what are the actual like, where does my body need to be? Where do I need to have a ticket to? Like, and of course, there are times where the money comes into that. But if you don't look at it from a money standpoint, a lot of things can come to you in other ways. And those pieces that then do require money are kind of broken down to their bare minimum. And one of the benefits of looking at it not through that lens is that when we look at it and we look at it only through money, we see a big number. If I added up everything that I did in India at like cost value or which, I mean, one of the things that happened, right? I found myself at the top of this mountain that I'd heard someone mention like years before that I'd written down. Like, I have to go to the top of this mountain, Mount Abu in India. And I ended up being invited to be part of a piece in the Middle East meditation conference. Like, I got to be the voice of the United States. There's no one else there from the States. There was no other white person there. And they invited me in to represent and be silent with them and meditate with them on behalf of the United States. Like, that is not something that would have happened if I had planned out what I was doing there. And that's also like, I didn't pay $1 for that. No one asked me for anything. That wasn't part of anything that was happening. But if I were to put a cost on that, if I were to look at it backwards and say, what was this going to cost me? It's really easy to get trapped and feel like there's no way to make that actually happen. But if we start to break apart, just what do I want to feel when I'm somewhere? What am I getting clear on what we want? I'm getting like way tangential into all this, but I also think I'm genuinely trying to answer all the thoughts together at once. One thing that feels really important to say, and then I'll toss it back and see where what's feeling like digging further into or pivoting into. Illness. I've got this brain injury, this mesial temporal sclerosis, this like bruise in my brain that's causing seizures and electrical storms and all kinds of other stuff that just radiates out from there. And then I've got other things on top of that, but we're going to just keep it as simple as we can for the sake of this. That on a very basic level, like really impacts my cognitive abilities and oftentimes impacts where I'm physically able to be. And it's interesting to look at those things that several years ago, it was like, I really felt like there was nothing I could do for myself or for anyone here anymore. I felt like I feel too debilitated. I feel too sick. I'm in too much pain. And now I'm like still dealing with a lot of that. And I'm also having meetings with senators and working through government channels to create like lasting, large scale infrastructural change for housing and marine welfare. So I feel like it's really important to highlight like that's still a sick person doing all of that. And what I've started to lean into is just telling people like I'm to whatever degree and letting myself be whatever it takes for me to get there, I got there. And if somebody wants to put something on me that I should be this, that, or the other thing about what all it took me to get there, I'm just letting that roll off my back. And that's like for me and probably many other people, much easier said than done. The actual rolling off my back is probably like an insane, like, okay, please just, if I could just get you off there. But that's my practice is like, I'm committed to not letting this be something that I take on because it's getting in the way of the work and it's just not necessary. Like we are all out there struggling with something, even if it's just the people that are struggling to be with reality, which is a large scale of those in charge, I would say. But we're all struggling with finding those pieces that let us really be here. And so the more permission I'm giving to being real with myself about that is like, okay, what's hard for me? It's hard for me to read. So then having to say to people like, hey, I need a different way to engage with this, or being in a government office and then being like, can you send me a calendar invite on the computer? And me being like, I cannot. I do Post-it notes. Would you like a Post-it note? Like really, but I think it's kind of potent to share that that's how I'm showing up, like in a senatorial office. Like it's not, because I think that there's so much that we lock ourselves out of with the money, with the presentation, all these things where we think we have to be this way and we can't do it until then. And that like if there's anything that happenstantial magic and illness have taught me, it's that is not true.
Mic drop. There's so much that we lock ourselves out of, and it's not actually true. So one of the things about the Fool archetype is that it looks like they're like stepping off of a solid ground onto nothing. But the thing is, the Fool knows that there's something. They have something intact because they're the 0 point, right? So like they're coming from source and they're all like, hey, no, really, it's like this. No, really, it is actually like this. And they take that step. And part of what that gives them the permission to do is to say the hard thing to people in power. The Fool, the jester, is able to say the hard thing to people in power without getting killed. Like, whereas if somebody else like logically were like, well, it's like this, they'd be like, no, and you're dead now. Like, I'm gonna cut your head off. But to be able to deliver something with ease, with humor, to deliver truth in a way that can be heard by established authority is like profound. And not everyone has that, but if the Fool can lead, if the Fool can like be a way shower for others in that, that's a way of sharing privilege, the privilege of that connection, the privilege of that seamless connection to source, to that trust. And I feel like a lot of your story just highlighted that, like ways that you share your privilege, ways that you share your privilege of being that connected to that layer of trust with all that is. No big deal.
That's really
You're having watched you develop over the last 10 years, like I have like an inside view on like where you've struggled. And also where you've come out with like incredible grace, and everything that you just said shared such incredible grace. Am I going to trust, or am I going to plan and wait? And am I going to trust with grace right? Because like you've moved from like sleep, which I did this too. Like my friend Ashley and I hitchhiked across the country when we were 20, 22 or something. And like one night we ended up sleeping in a burnt down laundromat in um, Oakland or something with like really super sketchy people. And we were like, it's cool. It's cool. We can do anything. Like we've survived. We've done everything. So like, and now it's like, you know, I can avail myself in a different way. I can avail myself to life in a more graceful, kind to myself, kind to others, kind to the earth kind of way.
Mm.
So I'm curious. I don't know if this is a quick story, and we have like 15 minutes left. But can you share a little bit about your trip to Bali? Can you share about the like World Council meeting a little bit? And totally cool if you want to reroute from that if that feels like too big of a thing.
No, it's exciting and fun, and I still hope it turns into something. I will be going to the Pentagon. I'll be going to DC next week, and I'm going to the Pentagon, and I'm really excited to talk in that context about what this might look like in application, which is a weird time in the world for it, but I'm also like, probably the best time. And I'm having to take that attitude about all governmental things right now, as far as my work goes. Like, what if this is the best time? What if they think that we're ready to be infiltrated and actually they're ready to be infiltrated by goodness? Choosing to believe. Their mayhem will be our benefit. I don't know.
Infiltrated by goodness. Just may that be the only. Anyway, keep going.
I know that was it. Woo. Okay. I went to Singapore recently to check out some of their environmental practices. They're doing some really cool things to deal with waste that are like, are we sharing brains about that? I found out that they were doing something that I'd thought of conceptually, was super excited to go there and like check it out in real time and see if we can collaborate on some things together intergovernmentally. And I really wanted to surf while I was there. Surfing is like another thing that just makes me feel like one of few things that just takes me out of my head and history and gets me in my heart and in my body. And I honestly had a difficult time. I had a difficult trip. I got some difficult news. All I wanted was to surf. And my friends were like, please get somewhere that you can take care of yourself and stop thinking about everything you're doing, everything else you're doing for 5 minutes. And I'd been to Bali before. I actually learned how to surf there, which is another story of happenstance where I thought I was going to Cambodia and I ended up in Bali. And I was like, well, ended up here, might as well learn how to surf. Glad I did. So I went back and I ended up in this really incredible like surfing hostel. And I was there with all kinds of other people from around the world. And we were meeting in the treehouse every night, as you do. I will be honest, we were there because we were all smoking tobacco. That was what brought us. It was the tobacco treehouse. We're there tobaccoing together. That was the point of unity. And we got into these like 7-hour long conversations over and over again about capitalism and our communities and our environment and our work and our like, but just hearing each other like deeply tread through what's working for you in your country, what's working for you in your country. And you know, we've got a Swiss banker, we've got an analyst from North Korea, we've got like a bartender from Ireland, we've got this diverse group of folks that are just meeting and diving into all this. I got to shout out Lucy from London. We got Lucy from London, who's also super into waste and finding new purpose for things. So all of us are connecting over this and just hearing each other deeply. And it was really interesting for me because I have so many of my friends here in the States. There's a super strong anti-capitalist rhetoric for good reason. And it was really interesting suddenly hearing someone like change my mind in 2 seconds where, I mean, it wasn't 2 seconds. We're having really long conversations, but there is that moment, right, where your brain like opens back up to something that you thought you were totally a hard wall to. And ultimately being hard walls to things for the most part isn't necessary. Obviously there's some really dramatic places to be a dramatic hard wall. I digress. we're in the treehouse, we're talking about all of that, and the way that this conversation is being presented is like, well, you've got to look at how capitalism is existing in the United States. It's not just capitalism as a practice, whereas for us, the way we're experiencing it, it's actually really nutritive because we're not putting profit over people. People are over the profit, but the profit is the basis for that is allowing the space for people to be individuals, to have sovereignty. Like, it was a different tool for them, the way that that was being. This person was from Portugal, now working as a Swiss banker. So it was really an interesting dialogue to have. And I could say more about that, but I'm curious, Meg, where I set the stage for it, but I want to know what you want to hear about it.
It was that. It was that piece, because honestly, that your reliance of that conversation actually changed my mind about the rhetoric that has been installed. That like, a lot of this could be neutral if people, if Earth, if more than human were positioned differently. That yeah, it was that you touched it. And also like that story, a lot of that story, which which may not have totally been shared here now, but a lot of that is also just like a way that you operate with the happenstantial magic. Like everything just, you pay attention to where things align and see that.
Thank you. It was really special because what I ended up saying, and this is the part I'm excited to follow up on in DC next week, is that I went out on a limb and invited all these people who I just met but have been having these deep conversations with, like, this might sound crazy, but what if we started a new UN for the younger generations, where we're actually analyzing what's working per country, and every country has a voice in there. I thought it was interesting that Palestine is not part of the UN as it is now. I learned that as I was researching some of this. So that everyone is part of. There's one other country that I can't remember this moment that's also not part of it presently. But and that, I mean, it's just amazing to think that I went there like feeling pretty stripped of myself, and that what I ended up finding was like community, connection, care in a treehouse. And everyone said yes. Everyone was like, yeah, actually, we'd be really interested in representing our countries and having that communication, because there are so many things that are already working in the world. Like, we just need to put them all together. And one other thing I want to say about Bali while we're on it, just because it's so present to this waste conversation, is that, well, I don't know if anybody else has been surfing in Bali, but you're literally surfing in trash. So I'm out there, I'm having this, like, the happiest feeling that I ever get in being alive in my body. And I'm literally wading my arms through garbage. And I think for a lot of people, like, I don't know actually how that is interpreted by a lot of people, but for me, being in there, knowing that I'm doing something about it, it was actually really rejuvenating as well, to be like, I'm not my job, I'm not any of these things. I have this heart and this body and this story. And I that experience, and then coming back and talking about that with Meg, actually helped me get really clear that, like, waste as a whole and as it relates to our interpersonal landscape is really my jam. Like, I want to change how that's perceived. Okay.
Ooh, rad. Yes. Oh my gosh. What an awesome conversation. I'm curious if you have any a practice or an approach or something, if you want to sum up something that you've said in this conversation to offer those who are here. What's a practice that we might consider?
I might do a couple. The first one is just presence, and I feel like that there is no end on that. So that I feel safe in saying that, and anyone who's like, I'm already working on that, it's like, there is more. There is always more. And there's so many different things to be present to. So I think, like, for myself specifically, I'm looking at opportunity. I'm presencing to opportunity. I'm presencing to creativity, and I'm presencing to reality and, like, truth. I think that's a really big one that I've got a couple people asking me lately, like, what really made the difference for you in like surviving all these things? And it's honestly the truth. Like my practice of what is real and how do I show up really back to that. That
What is
honesty.
that? What does that look like? Can you give us an example of what that looks like for you? Like, do you journal? Do you sit down and talk to yourself?
Um, it looks like it looks different for each thing. Like sometimes it's something where, and there's a lot of layers, honestly. Some of these truths are really hard and like have, you know, spiky shells and are like coconut shells where you're throwing it at the ground and you're like, I can't get it to crack open. So I think, and that's where this listening sort of piece comes back in of like, okay, well, I've got to, I got to get present to it. I got to ask what, I got to get my deep listening going. And I've got to be, there's a willingness too to like get messy and find out. Because I'm trying to think of an example of something. Also, the cat is outside of the tugboat and the meow is just it's like getting more and more. I'm going to be there so soon. So it's because it's kind of like part of my thing to be doing all of the whatevers whenever they're as they're showing up in all their like the madness and colorfulness and wildness is kind of part of the jam for me. So I feel like in a way inviting that in, like inviting color, inviting wild, inviting madness, and then being willing to hear what's offered through that and then take an action. Someone pointed out to me the other day that like action is my medicine. And I think that's really, I'm like, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? And sometimes it's not like the doing is the not doing. That's super important and part of that. But it's, there's still, we're still always thinking like we're landing somewhere, and it just as much as in our advocacy work that like doing nothing is still doing something, it's the same in our like peaceful practice. So okay, I hope that did a good seed.
That was rad. Yeah, the acting. I my friend JK Ultra, who also has a podcast on YouTube, which I highly recommend listening to. Um, in one of her Tuesday night lives, she was talking about the potency of making a decision. Like when you make a decision and then follow through with that, it like sets forth a whole course of action. And I feel like one of the ways that in our current Western context we're kept small, tired, and controlled is to stay only in mental realms. I I wouldn't say inner life realms because I feel like the whole implication of inner life is that you're present to it. But staying in like that spinning state without making a decision or acting. And yeah, there's something about that, about inviting the madness, inviting the wild, inviting the stuff that might be spinning. It's like I feel like I've had so much I've grown into my capacity for that, my desire for that to be like, "Oh, like it's spinning right now. It's wild. It's chaotic." Instead of avoiding that, what happens when I invite that in and then presence it, notice what's true, which really is that's a wild process. And then taking some kind of step with that. That's kind of what I heard from what you just said. Does that feel like a fair summation?
Well done. Yes.
Thank you. Um, I am curious if you are open to receiving a question if there's one in the room,
Totally.
from those who are here. Is there somebody who wants to come off mute? And if you could, drop a text in the text box so I can see, or wave your hand, and I will just add you. Rad. Okay. Oh, I'm realizing that there were things that were said that I didn't catch. Um, okay, there is currently no question, I don't think. Just some thank yous. So, which I also have. Thank you. Teddy, is there anything, you want to share with us? Like, is there anything you're promoting or anything you wanna draw our attention towards?
Yeah. I, one thing is that I'm doing an art show, a year long. It's going to be up at the Center for Wooden Boats, which is a famously designed building. It just won the National Architecture Award actually this year. It gets over 100,000 visitors a year. All the art we are making out of boat parts, and we're providing the boat parts to artists. So that's called Waste is a Construct, and I'll share this with Meg after as well. But cwb.org/waste, and that will take you to some information on there. I wildly invite everyone to be part of that. And yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Ooh, are you saying that like that's like something that people could make things out of and apply to be a part of?
Yes.
Ooh, rad.
Yes.
Yes, please. The only announcement that I have is that I host a weekly chant service and a monthly workshop, and there are a bunch of other resources included in my community called Communitas. And if you're curious about walking together with other people who are really here for that walk, reach out. All right, loves. Thank you so much for being here. Teddy, thank you so much for sharing your stories and your teachings and your energy. Like, you're just so effervescent, and it's really sweet to be in your presence. And thank you all who are here live in the room and all of you who watch later. We're going to bring it to a close.
Thanks, Meg.